Today is February 23rd, 2021. I am Daniel Erickson, and today I am interviewing David Pettyjohn over Zoom about Oklahoma Humanities and his interactions with the organization. So thank you for joining me today over Zoom.
Hey, happy to be here.
Yeah. And so to start the interview, why don't you just tell me a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so as you said, I'm David Pettyjohn. I'm currently the executive director of the Idaho Humanities Council. I'm here in Boise, Idaho. I started in 2018, moving here from Oklahoma. So a little bit of background. I started with Oklahoma Humanities in 2001 as a program officer, and then director of programs, and then assistant director. And I left in 2012 to become the executive director of Preservation Oklahoma. And then after 5 years there, I relocated here for this position. University of Tulsa graduate, undergraduate degree in history, secondary education, and my master's degree is also from the University of Tulsa in history. So that's a little bit of who I am.
Yeah, great. And so, yeah, moving on, could you tell me a bit about growing up and your early education up through high school?
Oh yeah, certainly. So I was born in Illinois, and uh, northern, and then lived in northern Illinois until I was 12. And even then, I just loved history. I loved reading, and I loved learning and exploring new ideas. Now, of course, this was in the 70s, so we didn't have the internet or other technological advancements. But my mom had a bookshelf, very simple bookshelf, and at the bottom was an encyclopedia set. And I spent hours, just learning things and going through all sorts of subjects. I was always primarily attracted to obviously history and geography. And then in 1984, my family moved to Oklahoma. And it was just a wonderful experience. Loved Oklahoma, fantastic state. Public school, went to Broken Arrow, public schools, graduated from Broken Arrow High School in 1989. And I had some amazing teachers. One teacher in particular, Patricia Trusty, now Dr. Trusty, she was my US history teacher in 10th grade and really encouraged me to follow it, was incredibly supportive, and made history just come alive, and was really important and transformative in kind of my future career. And so yeah, that's a little bit. I took a lot of classes on religion and geography, and it was just a great learning experience. College was the same. Uh, University of Tulsa had some amazing history teacher. Dr. James Ronda was one of them. He absolutely was a storyteller. He was on the American West. That was his specialty. And it's kind of interesting now that I live in the American West. Never thought that was going to happen, in my life, but you never know where it takes you. And every class was just a story, and he would just draw you in, and all the layers associated with it, all the different stories that I had not heard. Another professor who I was a work study student in the history department at TU, Dr. Lawrence Kress. And it's interesting, he was actually chair of the Oklahoma Humanities Council when I was there. Uh, I remember, I think, going into his office asking a question, and he asked me to mail something as an intern, and it was back to OHC. It just went through my head, but kind of, reflecting and looking back, I do remember that was probably the first time I had heard of them. So uh, my emphasis was on medieval English history. I just kind of fell in love with medieval England. And so Dr. Marvin Lomax was kind of the lead professor of that. And he was interesting. He was very, he had a lot of character. I'll just kind of say that, but he was a great guy, very supportive. He served on my thesis committee. And then, yeah, that's, I don't use a lot of the medieval English history now, but it's good.
Yeah. Is the medieval English what you focused on in grad school?
I did, yeah. My thesis was actually on uh, um, the role of excommunication in church-state relations, and I looked at King John, you know, how he was excommunicated, and of course, gosh, this was a long time ago. Some of the, I haven't really delved into it, but yeah, that was my focus. You know, had to take a medieval Latin test as one of my language requirements. So, and William Cafaro, I think he's now at Vanderbilt, was my thesis advisor. Great guy, great guy.
Yeah. What was it about the medieval English stuff that interested you so much?
Honestly, I think it had to do with some of the mythology when I was growing up, you know, like dragons and castles. And then it was an area that I had never really heard of. I mean, I didn't really study it, you know, that much in public education. I think I took a class on the Middle Ages my senior year in high school, and we watched The Lion in Winter. I don't know if you're familiar with that great movie from 1968, Katharine Hepburn and Peter O'Toole, about Henry II and Eleanor of Aquitaine. And I think it was misclassified as the Dark Ages when I was growing up. And so learning about society and learning about the feudal system and understanding how it led to the Renaissance and even just the monarchy, I found incredibly fascinating.
Cool.
Yeah. What? Yeah. Anyway, do you
Yeah.
study medieval? I mean, is that kind of your specialty?
Not really.
Okay.
But yeah, and so once you wrapped up, did you go to grad school right after
I did.
undergrad?
I did. I was fortunate enough to actually, I think I took like a year break. No, wait, I can't remember. I went, there was a moment in my life that I thought the seminary was calling my name. And so I went to seminary for like 2 months or a month and knew it was not for me. So I came back and pursued my secondary education certificate. And then I was honored to receive a full ride to grad school at TU. And so it was a year and then 2 years for the master's degree.
Okay. And then after graduating from grad school, where'd you go next?
Yeah, it was an interesting experience. I'll tell you what. I had applied to many PhD programs. I mean, I was some really top tier. Unfortunately, or fortunately, looking back, I was not accepted to any. In the 90s, there was a real flood of applications for PhDs, particularly in history. And I just was never quite, I didn't quite have the qualifications. But NYU offered me a position in their Master's in Liberal Studies program. So I went ahead, bit the bullet, and moved to New York City. And it was one of the best things I ever did. I didn't know a soul. And it opened up the world to me in many ways. You know, living in Manhattan, made some great friends. Spent about a year in the NYU program and realized that, you know, I don't really need a second master's, and let's just kind of leave it at that. And I actually worked in retail. I worked for Barnes and Noble, you know, at Union Square, which was kind of one of their main stores. Barnes and Noble was huge in the 90s and headquartered in New York, and I was in the community relations department. So I worked with a lot of authors. So I was able to meet, Toni Morrison, Maya Angelou, a lot of, and so I helped coordinate those author events. And it was just fantastic. So I stayed there another year, but Oklahoma was home, and it kind of drew me back. I was, kind of far away from family and friends. So actually applied to the University of Oklahoma's PhD program, was accepted, and came back to Tulsa. I was from the Tulsa area, and it just didn't work out, for me, unfortunately, to kind of pursue, the PhD. And that's where my life, really, to be quite honest with you, took the not-for-profit turn. A friend of mine worked for a nonprofit called the Society for Sedimentary Geology, and they needed a temp agency, a temp, to come in and help. So I actually, went in, helped, and things just happened to work out, and I was hired as their publications coordinator. And it opened up the whole world of not-for-profit management, working with the board, kind of understanding um, the way you work with members. It was a membership organization. It's still there. It also allowed me to travel. We would go to, I didn't travel much. We didn't have the financial means when I was a child to travel. So I went to, New Orleans for the first time, and Denver, and New Jersey, and all of these places. It was fantastic. So I was there for a little over 2 years. And then just, fell in love with someone that brought me to Oklahoma City, and left my job, and that did not work out. However, while I was looking for a job, I saw an ad in the paper, and it asked for seeking a program officer at the Oklahoma Humanities Council. I was not really familiar with Oklahoma Humanities Council. To be quite honest, I wasn't quite sure what the term humanities truly meant. So I did some research, went to their website, and had my interview in May of 2001, and came back for a second interview. It's interesting, I actually had to write a grant. Anita May, who was the director at the time, asked me back, and as part of the second interview, I had to write a grant, and I chose to write about the seeking funding for the, at that time, 80th anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre, and wrote the grant, completed a budget, and brought it in. And I'll never forget, I read the offices were in the McAlpine Center, and it was funny, kind of going back to my first interview. Stage Center was there. I don't know if you're familiar with Stage Center. It was across from the McAlpine Center. AIA award-winning structure. It was kind of known as the Lego structure. You should look it up when you have a chance. It was beautifully designed, but anyway, it's been torn down. I was walking through Stage Center because the offices, the address was on Sheridan, which was blocked off. It was closed years ago for Festival Plaza. It was this brick plaza. So I wasn't really quite sure. And you didn't have Google Maps back then. So, and I remember roaming around in Stage Center, and I was like, oh my gosh. Fortunately, I'm an early person. So I always, put a little extra time. So then I remember going up, led me to the McAlpine Center, went upstairs, and around the corner, Elizabeth was her name. She was the administrative coordinator. And I poked my head around, and she goes, are you here, looking for Oklahoma Humanities? And I said, yes. She goes, you passed your first test. So that was kind of my introduction, to the offices. So anyway, I have the interview. A few weeks, like a week later, Anita says she would like to bring me in for a second one. And so go through the grant, all of that. And then it came down to the budget. And at that time, which I think they still do, there was a program in the budget called Gifts and Match. And it was where if you had you could request up to a certain amount in outright funds, but you don't have to match it with cash. If you wanted additional funding, you could do that, but you had to match it with cash. And that was match for gifts, gifts for cash. And I didn't quite get it, in the application. And then as Anita's walking me through it, I got it. And she looked at me and she says, "Congratulations, you're hired." So and I started on June the 6th, 2001. So that's kind of what led me to OHC.
Yeah. So you said first you were programs officer for Oklahoma Humanities?
Yeah, I started out as a program officer, oversaw the grants, and also the Great Plains Chautauqua. And yeah, those were my two main responsibilities at the time.
Yeah. And so what, I don't know, what was sort of like day-to-day basis like for that position?
So at the beginning, I just read a lot. There were filing cabinets, on the back wall, and I just pulled grant files, and I would just read through them to understand what kind of board discussion was on them. I read through board minutes, and also very meticulous record keeping. So anytime you spoke to somebody on the phone, about a grant, you would write a note and then you would put it in the folder. So you could go back and just trace from the very beginning, from the draft stage through the through the consultation stage, through any sort of amendments. It kind of helped me understand, kind of the process. So, it really dealt with grants, understanding them. So really day to day was at the beginning, getting to know the network, getting to know the programs, getting to know the board, working with this board, kind of what the relationship between staff and the board, was all about. Understanding the NEH guidelines. I dove into those like crazy. I loved those NEH guidelines. And I would just, read the general operating support, guidelines. And then back then it was a whole different auditing system. So you'd read like A122, I think is what it was called. Also communicating with other program officers, understand, because this was kind of at the beginning of HumTalk, and which was a listserv. So there was a lot of communication going on about, hey, I have a question about this, or I have a question about that, or this is happening. The other thing that I was also, responsible for was a program called the Great Plains Chautauqua. I don't know if anybody's kind of talked to you about that, but Chautauqua was a week-long humanities festival. And that humanities festival featured costumed characterizations of historic individuals around a central theme. And so it wasn't just an evening presentation, there were workshops, throughout the week. So what this was, it traveled to primarily rural communities. That was really its focus. It started in the 90s, late 80s by Ev Albers, who was the director of the North Dakota Humanities Council. And it harkened back to Chautauquas. Chautauquas, you have a Chautauqua Avenue in Norman, Oklahoma. Chautauquas were huge at the turn of the 19th century. It allowed like some of the leading speakers of the day would come, and it would be outdoors. And William Jennings Bryant was like the lead Chautauquan. So you'd see acts, you would see oratory, you would see all of these things, and the entire town would gather for it. It was a very popular event. Well, in the 80s, kind of as a way of bringing the humanities back, Ev Albers and Jerome Tweeten, who was another, and then Clay Jenkinson actually was one of the leading ones. He received the National Humanities Medal from H.W. Bush, actually. So it was, it would come to the town like a circus. and, you know, a huge kind of semi with all the chairs and the massive tent. And these characters would come, and what would happen is they do this evening presentation in character, and then there'd be a Q&A. And what this Q&A was, you weren't talking to John Jacob Astor in 2004. John Jacob Astor was visiting you from 1805. So if you would ask a question like, hey, when did you die? He'd be like, I'm very much alive. And, you know, really using the texts of these individuals to stay true to the character. And then after a Q&A with the character, the scholar would then engage. It was an amazing program. I mean, it was fantastic. So there was a newspaper or flyer that was put together, and it was catered for each town. So what I was responsible for was finding the host communities, and there were 2 of them in each state, and then working with them about a schedule. You know, where will these take place? You know, where's the tent going to be? You know, also helping them with sponsorships. And then I was on site, you know, for most of that week for the event. So yeah, those were kind of, and then the other thing that being from the eastern side of Oklahoma, I didn't really know that much about Oklahoma City or Western Oklahoma. You know, I don't know if it's still that way, but there was that divide, you know, between the state. I mean, that Twin Territory, Oklahoma Territory sort of disconnect. And so I got to travel the state. And as a matter of fact, you know, over my desk that I'm looking at is a roadmap from 2001, 2002 of Oklahoma. And I put a red dot for every community I visited. And this map, you know, was kind of covered, and I had it framed. And now it sits here in my office, you know, as a reminder of all the communities I visited. And to the right, my right, your left, is a roadmap of Idaho, that I've started that tradition here. But it was a great opportunity to really get out and travel the state. I also served on the Let's Talk About It advisory committee as well. And we would meet quarterly. Jennifer Kidney, who was the kind of Let's Talk About It director at that time, you know, we would meet quarterly, talk about new themes, work with her on a cooperative agreement. I would also assist her on occasion with shipping the books out to the libraries. That was fun. You know, I really enjoyed that. Yeah, it was a great time.
Yeah. So on your end, as part of the staff at Oklahoma Humanities, what was the grants process like on your end of like giving out the grants?
So my job, and I always kind of viewed it, and I still view it to this day, I always felt my job was to help them get their money. This is taxpayer funds, you know? Now, obviously, it had to be a grant that met the guidelines. It had to be, you know, money that was spent according to federal law and regulations and OHC guidelines. So I would counsel grantees, you know, from the beginning. You know, if they had an idea, we would visit about it, and we'd say, well, have you considered this? Or are there these opportunities, or, you know, that? And then they would always submit a draft. So it was required. So anytime drafts came in, and at the beginning, they were hard copies. I was part of the process. I helped build, you know, the online Found It grant program. You know, I think that was in 2008, 2007, I can't recall. But myself and Kelly Burns, you know, worked together on that. But it was a lot of fun. I got to really know these communities and these organizations. Anita May, who was the director who hired me, gave me the best piece of advice. And she said, David, don't fall in love with the grant. And I never did. You know, it was nothing personal. It was nothing, you know, that I could have done differently, or the grantee. There's just a lot of factors that are involved. But so reviewing the draft, I would, you know, then write a letter with recommendations. And then once the final came in, kind of looked through it, worked with other staff members to have a look at the budget, and then would be there. We'd put some staff comments together, and during the board meeting, we'd review them in groups, and didn't really speak. It was a board decision, and would be there to answer any questions. Now, there were many times that I did not agree with the board decisions, and there were, some questions, but overall, it was a fairly smooth process. And then I got the pleasure of calling them and saying, hey, your grant was funded. And then the more uncomfortable call and say, hey, just want to let you know that the board did not fund your application. And it was kind of one of those situations where uh, I only had one really bad experience with that. I had a professor who was not very nice to me, but that was pretty rare. But overall, people understood, would encourage them to reapply. And then, of course, I had the pleasure of working with several administrative assistants, Laura Benson, I think that was her last name. And sorry, it's been a long time, but Laura, Elizabeth at the beginning, and then Kelly, when I'd left, to help with the paperwork and follow up any issues. So that was kind of the process.
Yeah. And I don't know, sort of what types of grants did you get, like
Oh,
applications
yeah.
for?
So the major grants really just like exhibits, were kind of the issue. We also offered small research grants, so I helped with those. Festivals, the Red Dirt Book Festival, the John Hope Franklin Center for Reconciliation, worked with the Tulsa Arts and Humanities Council, worked with the Sam Noble Museum of Art, the Western the Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum, National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum, the Oklahoma City Museum of Art, Philbrook, but even website development. Yeah, those were just simple traditional humanities programs.
Okay. And so you said that later on you changed your position within the organization.
I did. I was promoted to director of programs, and also became involved with the program committee of program officer committee at the national level. And that was a lot of fun. I attended, back then, we used to have national program officer meetings. And so I never had the opportunity to attend because I know after 9/11, oh, here's a story. This is good.
Okay.
So started in 2001 in June. And at that time, the National Endowment for the Humanities, they offered kind of special grants that were targeted to individual state councils. And one of those was extending the reach. That was kind of the name of the grant. And Oklahoma was one of those selected that they could apply. And they did. I think it was like 10,000. I can't remember the amount. And they used it to bring Connections program, which was developed by the Vermont Council, but brought it to Oklahoma to work with literacy for adults. So in September of that year, they brought the program directors to the NEH offices. At that time, the NEH offices were located in the old post office, which is now known today as the Trump International Hotel. So went there, going to DC. It was exciting. My first time to go to NEH offices. We flew in on September the 8th. We were scheduled to fly out on September the 11th of 2001. So September 10th, we had the meeting. The next morning, they were going to take us down to the Museum of American History for a tour. We were scheduled to fly out that afternoon. I had checked out of the hotel that morning, sitting in the lobby with Anita, when somebody comes down who was also at the meeting and said, hey, a plane flew into the World Trade Center. I was like, what are you talking about? And then I thought it was like an accident, you know, that had happened in the 40s with the Empire State Building. And then somebody else says another plane is hit. There's a bomb at the State Department, and then I look up and I see the National Guard just fly by. And at that moment, everything changed. DC was shut down. We weren't allowed to leave. We had to end up driving back, you know, from to Oklahoma. That was that. There's much more to that story, but it was very memorable. It was Jennifer Kidney, Anita Mae, and myself traversing the United States of America, not seeing a plane in sight, and just listening to the news. It was something. So jump ahead, sorry. Anita Mae retires in 2005, Ann Thompson becomes director in 2006. And they held the program officers meeting in New York City in 2006. So I went back to New York. It was great, wonderful opportunity. And then we hosted it in Oklahoma City in 2007. It was the centennial year. Fortunately, Ann was very up for it and worked with the National Program Officers Committee. And we had about 40 program officers come to Oklahoma City. It was great. It was a wonderful opportunity, had a fantastic time. So that was, and then on account of that, I got to serve on the planning committee for the National Humanities Conference, which at that time was just the Federation Conference, and that was at Crystal City, which I'd never been, but you know, it's not really that exciting. It's just on the other side of the Reagan National Airport, but it was fun. And so as director of programs, I brought moms, you know, working with Ann, brought Museum on Main Street to Oklahoma, went to the national planning meeting in Las Vegas to learn more about it. We chose Journey Stories, and Journey Stories opened up in Okmulgee, Oklahoma in 2009. So it was fun, you know, working on several Museum on Main Street. The next one was Key Ingredient. So that was a duty I took on. And then I was promoted to assistant director. I think I was only the assistant director in the council's history. But I kind of took on more budgeting things. You know, one of the things that Ann did was staff became more involved in budgeting, but I kind of became a little bit more involved, you know, in kind of overall budgeting. I did some lobbying at the state. I never quite did the Humanities on the Hill, but, you know, kind of assist with the NEH compliance, materials for Humanities on the Hill. Also helping with agendas, traveling the state. So just a little bit more responsibility. So that's kind of how it evolved over time.
Okay. Could you tell me about the Museum on Main Street program?
Yeah, absolutely. We do it here in Idaho too. So Museum on Main Street is a partnership between state humanities councils and the Smithsonian Institution. They have a division called SITES, Smithsonian Institution Traveling Exhibit Services. So I want to say it was it in the 90s? Anyway, I can't quite recall. But it is a specially designed exhibit for rural communities. So sites, they do traveling exhibits, but they cost a lot of money and they require a lot of space. So what this program does, it provides that Smithsonian experience. It's designed, beautifully crafted, and it's small enough, like 650 square feet, to fit inside a space in a smaller town. So, but it's not just an exhibit that arrives in your community. There are 2 training workshops provided to each site. So there's a programming workshop that introduces the community to the themes. A representative from sites comes, you know, kind of talks about the overall themes. and then how you are able to tie it to your community. Uh, a scholar is selected at the state level to work with each of the communities in developing either an exhibit or programming. A grant is provided to the communities to fund that, and all advertising is provided, and the shipment is provided. Travel to the programming workshop and the installation workshop at the first site, completely covered. And I believe kind of at the beginning charged a very small fee, like maybe $200. Obviously, if you were selected, you would get that. And then I believe it was ultimately waived. So it didn't cost this community a thing. Sought outside assistance, and funding for that. And it's at its core, it's a capacity building program. Because for a community to say, we have hosted the Smithsonian's coming to Newkirk, so to speak, it shows that the training that they were given, because that was another thing, additional technical training, bringing in consultants like how do you properly use social media, docent training. Hey, here's docent guides. What really kind of works for what do you need? So once the exhibit leaves, you are able to say, well, what else can we do? We can do something even bigger, even better. And so, yeah, Journey Stories opened up, I think it was July at the Creek Council House. Jerry Askins, who was Lieutenant Governor of Oklahoma at the time, came, and we had the chief of the Cherokee Nation, and big ribbon cutting. It was fantastic. It was hot, but it was fantastic. So I oversaw Journey Stories. And then the next exhibit that we brought in was Key Ingredients, that looked at America by Food. And that's what's really kind of neat about these exhibits. They kind of show the humanities in a really neat and accessible light. Because one of the challenges that I faced and continue to face is the notion that the humanities are elitist, that the humanities are liberal, that the humanities are only for the select few, and that is for the most further thing from the truth. So, everybody enjoys a good meal and the family traditions associated with this. So that's what this exhibit did. So I oversaw that one. And I just lined up the communities for New Harmonies when I left the council. But that's Museum on Main Street.
Yeah, sounds like a great program.
It really is, yeah. So I think in Oklahoma right now, I think they have Crossroads that's going to open. So if it's nearby, you should go check it out. We just had Crossroads here in Idaho. It's a great, great exhibit.
Yeah, I might try.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's see. You mentioned that while you were at Oklahoma Humanities, you were there during some like leadership changes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I don't know, were there any noticeable differences as executive directors rotated out?
I would say yes, and I think that's just pretty common, just different personality styles, different backgrounds. Anita was the second director ever of the Oklahoma Council. Had been there since '74, I believe. The Oklahoma Council was one of the first six. I actually, in the 40th anniversary, back, 10 years ago, of course, I actually researched the history of the council, and Oklahoma Magazine, Oklahoma Humanities. I wrote the article and kind of helped with the timeline of that. Because, odd fact, I turned 50 this year. And so I was born the same year as the Oklahoma Council. So it was kind of neat. I was like turned 40 and, look back in 1971. And so really had a great opportunity to kind of see, Anita's contributions and the growth and, understanding that. So Anne came in and it was just a different style. Anne did not have the experience with state councils. So it was a great opportunity to, show her around the state and introduce her to people. And there were changes, just even simple changes that were made when any new director comes in about simple things like going to direct deposit instead of a check every 2 weeks, which was nice. And she was there a lot, you know, she was very encouraging about bringing the program officers meeting, very encouraging about pursuing museum on Main Street, really encouraged the staff to think of, you know, ideas and think of new things that we could do. Really kind of looked at some of the programming we had, like territory speakers, our tracks traveling exhibit program, History Alive, and really kind of phased those out. Went through strategic planning and through that process. Also, the Great Plains Chautauqua was becoming a little too cumbersome, and unfortunately really couldn't find sites, and funding had gone down. So we kind of ended our relationship with that as well, working more closely with the Oklahoma Chautauqua, kind of expanding that. So yeah, I mean, just different management styles. I mean, but yeah, it was, so yes, indeed.
Yeah. Was Anne the director there until you left?
She was, yes.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, she was, because she left, what was it, a year ago? Yeah, yeah, she retired in 2019.
Okay. And you just briefly mentioned the Oklahoma Chautauqua. Is that a
Oh,
sort of very similar thing to the Great Plains
so
one?
a little bit different.
Okay.
So while Great Plains Chautauqua was kind of one of the first things, Tulsa loved the concept, fell in love with it. So they developed their own Chautauqua they did every year, and they called it the Tulsa Chautauqua, put on by the Arts and Humanities Council of Tulsa, which is now AHA. But, and they, Weldon is where they were. And it was kind of just similar, you know, they had their own theme. So I worked with them because they'd come to us for a grant. And so provided a challenge grant, you know, I think it was like $15,000, $20,000. And then hired the scholars, did a rehearsal weekend. But then other towns, you know, who may have hosted the Great Plains still looked like Altus and Enid. So they, you know, would sign up, like there was like a permanent host site application at the time where you would either get the Tulsa Chautauqua or the Great Plains Chautauqua. And so kind of similar, but the difference is if the Tulsa Chautauqua, which was renamed Oklahoma Chautauqua, it's now back just to Tulsa, and then Enid Chautauqua in the park had its own. The other communities had to provide their own tent and chairs and sound system and develop their own materials. It wasn't as all in one as Great Plains. And they would apply to Oklahoma Humanities for a grant as well to kind of assist, but the most they could apply for was $8,500. And part of that was gifts and match. But yeah, kind of similar concept, but just different logistics.
Okay. And you sort of briefly went over it, but as your position changed within the organization, sort of how did your role and responsibilities develop along with that position?
Oh, yeah. So one of the things that gosh, that's a really good question. I'm trying to think kind of at each stage. And part of it was experience, I would say. You know, Anita told me that you don't really learn your job until 3 years. And at first I thought, oh my gosh, really 3 years? But no, it's very true. The first year is all new. The second year through that, and then the third year, you kind of, you know, have something to understand. I'm going into my 4th year here now, and I can tell you, yes, it's definitely true. So it was just understanding, you know, working with the board, learning more about financials, understanding budgeting, understanding NEH guidelines, understanding community outreach, public speaking. I had the great honor of representing, you know, OHC, you know, on different groups, different panels. And it gave me that experience to be more comfortable talking about the work that we do. Attending the National Federation Conference, you know, served on a couple panels there, working with my peers. But then as I became assistant director, it became more of a the responsibilities were a little different because some personnel issues, were discussed. So kind of understanding, I mean, nothing like, salaries or the like, but just, some concerns or some thoughts that, with the executive director, and just being very careful about privacy, understanding personnel laws, and all of those aspects. Um, Things you have to file to maintain your 501c3 status, all the boring things. Um, but, and then there was a moment where I kind of served as the institutional memory for a lot of things. Carla Walker was there when I started, and I know she's still there, but, she started in 2000. But then a lot of the people who were there, aside from Carla and I, they had left. So Carla and I were kind of the institutional memory, people. And that was a great responsibility as well. It was fun.
Yeah. And as a member of the staff of the organization, what was your relationship with the board for the organization like?
It was a great board. It was fantastic. They were very supportive. I really didn't have a personal relationship with them. I mean, they were technically my boss, not really technically my boss because the director was the boss. And then, of course, the board. It was, very supportive, a good network, very kind, but it was always professional. And anytime I emailed a board member, I would copy, Ann on it, or if there was any, during board meetings, I did not really speak until I was given the opportunity to, or if there was a question that somebody had and I could answer. So that was the relationship, with them. Now, obviously, we'd socialize, like if we were at a conference together, and they were a lot of fun, but it was very formal.
Okay. Yeah, were there any other programs or anything that you sort of oversaw or were involved with during your stay with Oklahoma Humanities that you haven't brought up yet?
Gosh, I'm trying to think. I think that's it.
Yeah.
We had other programs, but I didn't oversee them. I did work with Oklahoma Museums Association on tracks because we worked with the oh my gosh, what was the Carl Albert Center, and what is the other resource on your campus besides the Carl Albert Center?
Mm,
Maybe it was just the Carl Albert Center, something about Western history or something.
yeah, I'm
Well,
not
they came
sure.
to us for several. Yeah, they came to us for several exhibits, so traveling exhibits. So we, and back then they were, oh my gosh, they weighed a ton. They were wood, and all of the fancy new materials had not really quite made strides yet. But so I helped with that, the development of themes. Brenda and Stacy over at OMA, oh my gosh, they are just the most amazing people. Oh my goodness, Brenda Granger and Stacy O'Daniel, two of the nicest people you'll ever meet. They oversaw tracks, and so worked with them. Have to go in the storage. They were at the Kirkpatrick Center, Omniplex. I can't remember what it's called now. I mean, just dust and spiders. Like once or twice, I helped Stacy kind of go through old exhibits, and that is the one thing about not-for-profit work. There is no hierarchy when it comes to duties. I mean, you have to, I we got new carpet at McAlpine Center, and I hung all the new blinds. I'd lug things across the state and put stuff in cars and drive all over. Oh, okay, yeah, the one thing, sorry, the Oklahoma Humanities Awards, because there was a Oklahoma lecture in the humanities. That was an annual event that would alternate between Tulsa and Oklahoma City. And it was patterned after the Jefferson lecture in the humanities that the National Endowment does. So really big leading scholars would come. And so I assisted with that actually when I started. So there were several times I met authors at the airport, you know. One of the reasons Anita told me I was hired was because I was from Tulsa. So I would know how to drive around Tulsa, and I already lived in Oklahoma City for 6 months. So I wasn't going to go back. And so I always was kind of the, you know, the driver, you know, around Tulsa. And and then of course, you know, in Oklahoma City. So then we expanded that. That was one of the other things with Anne. We did an awards program. So I worked with Tracy Jenkins, who was the development director officer at the time, and we held an awards banquet. So I worked with her coordinating the, you know, the flowers, the arrangements, and then we did videos, which I'm sure you may have seen online. I don't know if they're still up on YouTube, but we worked with a great guy named Tanner Harriet, who's a videographer, and did a ton of interviews with people about the awardees. And I helped edit those down and kind of put them together and help, you know, with the event, you know, would, you know, help Anne with the emceeing, the menu, all of those fun things. And at the beginning, the very first Oklahoma Humanities awardee was Wilma Mankeller. So we had a private dinner just for her. And then we did the lecture, and it was always at the History Center, you know, the Chesapeake room of the History Center. And then it was Scott Momaday, and then we expanded the awards. And then eventually the lecture kind of was discontinued. So yeah, totally forgot about the good old awards.
Yeah, I'm glad you remembered.
Yeah, me too. I mean, they were a great experience. It wasn't like bad memories that I shut out. I think it was just, oh, okay.
Yeah, it can be easy to forget things sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we got about 10 or so minutes left until we hit an hour. And so that's a sort of wrapping up thing. Just want to ask you if you have any other thoughts that you want to share about the Oklahoma Humanities organization or just the humanities in general.
I was actually talking to a board member here yesterday about Oklahoma Humanities, or just the humanities in general. And Oklahoma Humanities Council, in some way, saved my life. You know, it opened up a world to me that I never thought I would have. It introduced me to people across the state of Oklahoma that I had the honor of working with. It showed me things not only about the state, but about myself and the human experience and just programming in general that has made my life better. It led me on a career path that has been the most rewarding, amazing experience. I wanted to be a high school history teacher. I first wanted to be a professor. And then that just didn't quite work out for me. And then I wanted to be a high school history teacher, but I didn't coach. I had no coaching experience, and that didn't work out. And then just by chance, you know, fell into this not-for-profit world, and it's led me to Boise, Idaho, leading the Idaho Humanities Council. And through actually, when I was at the Oklahoma Council, I served on another national planning committee for the St. Petersburg Conference with Rick Ardinger, who was the director here. You know, he retired, you know, and that's, you know, what brought me here. And great guy. And then, interestingly enough, Mark Johnson, former chair of the Idaho Humanities Council and former chair of the Federation of State Humanities Council, did strategic planning for the Oklahoma Council when I was there. So I met Mark at that time, and he was the head of the search committee that actually, you know, offered me the job. And I think Oklahoma Humanities is just an amazing organization that continues to do fantastic work across all 77 counties. Oklahoma can be a challenging state in a lot of ways, just like any other state. It's big, it has different viewpoints, different ideas, But what the council does, and does so brilliantly, it finds common ground. It allows opportunities for people to disagree, but do so in a respectful way. I think that I'm proud of my time there. It allowed me. I missed it desperately, when I left. I missed the Humanities Council. I wanted to be an executive director. That was kind of my goal. You kind of reach a stage in your career and you just kind of want to challenge yourself. And so I had spent a quarter of my life at that time at the Oklahoma Council, and it was just an opportunity presented itself, and became the director of Preservation Oklahoma, which was also a great experience. I had worked at POK, but then I just desperately missed the humanities community, and which led me to applying for this job here in Idaho. And so, yeah, I think that looking back, over 50 years, I think they have a record to be incredibly proud of. I'm not really in touch with as much, as I used to. Obviously, living here in Idaho, a lot of the staff, has changed, but I know they continue to do amazing work. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah, thanks for sharing.
Oh, no, you're welcome.
Yeah, thanks again for doing this interview with me.
No, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I had to think back. So just a little bit of advice for you, take it or leave it. But the not-for-profit sector, if it's something you fall into and is something, it's amazing. It has its own challenges, but it can really open up a lot of doors for you and give you some great avenues. So, and they do pay you. I remember giving a talk one time to a group, and I was kind of explaining what it's not-for-profit, because I don't know about you, but they didn't teach us about not-for-profits in college. You didn't really know. It was like, if you're a history major, you're going to teach. I mean, that's really your job. Maybe go into the State Department or government work, and then it's like people say, well, do you get paid? I'm like, yes, you get paid.
It's a little important.
Yes. So anyway.
Yeah. Well, if you don't have any questions or anything, I think that was a good interview.
All right. Well, thank you, Daniel. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Do you have any more today?
No. I think you're my last one this week.
Hey, all right.
Yeah. They want us to do about 2 a week or so. So
if you don't mind me asking, how many are you interviewing?
I'm not entirely sure what the end number will be. It'll probably be like, I don't know, 12 to 16 people, maybe.
Oh, that's a good group. That's great.
Yeah, and then there's 4 interns doing this. So we have a decently sized spreadsheet of people they put together that would be, potential people to contact for this stuff. So
good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for doing this. I hope you learn a lot, and I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I had a good time too.
All right. Thanks, Daniel. Enjoy your day.
Yeah, thank you. You too, man.